Hey there everyone, welcome to episode 2 of the Night Builds series. In this episode we're going to be going through the 3 skills Hurl, Rumble and Spikes. Now these 3 skills each have quite a bit of use in various places. Well, saying that actually Rumble is a little bit more niche, but the other 2 skills are definite skills that I would want to be playing on the class. They each have their place. Spikes is an all-rounder, Hurl is just really good in certain cases. So anyway, talking about Hurl first of all. This is the only range skill on the class, which for that reason alone, you're going to be wanting to use it in some cases. Now, the main thing I want to note on this is the low cooldown. 4 seconds is kind of nuts when you're thinking about how this class fights in melee. However, it actually has a ranged damage dealer that has a very low cooldown. Now, 4 seconds, okay, it may not sound ridiculously low that we have skills which are 2-second cooldown, but just imagine this with a cooldown potion, and also take into account that if you're playing Knight and you're stacking up your defense skills, you're going to be stacking them up and then using Hurl in between. And in fact, it doesn't matter so much that, you can't use it over and over and over, because you'll be wanting to use a couple of skills in between each use. So anyway, this is, like I said already, a ranged damage dealer. The damage doesn't look incredibly high, it's only 159%. You put a Skurin in, that's the element of your choice. It's got Skurins across the elements, so you can very nicely do some damage. And it's just the case that when you can spam this really frequently, and you've got all the defense on the class, you can actually deal some quite good damage from range. Now obviously you can do more damage in melee, but this skill, trust me, it's great. So we're going to go show it now up against some enemies. So just going to get past this laggy bit, because if I can remember correctly, apologies, I haven't made a video in a little over a month. I've been busy with the King's Road Festival, but we're back here now. So hopefully it's not lagging up here. I haven't done the test recently. So Hurl will hit enemies in a slightly weird way. Normally these things, they hit a sort of certain number of enemies or that kind of thing. That's what you'd expect. However, it's based on the location you hit. The location of the target, you will hit everything within a certain range of that target. So it actually hits an area much like the arcane ball. You can see I attacked there and hit all those enemies and it killed them all. So that's not so obvious when you sort of first look at the skill and maybe you're using it. But yeah, it really matters about which one you hit. So say of this group, if I hit the front of the group, then it would only hit this group. If I hit the middle of the group, then also hit the enemies back behind. So yeah, it's very easy for me to use because I'm used to playing Wizard and using the Arcane Ball, so I can attack this middle bit and I know, okay, I'm going to take out the whole group. However, if you're playing Knight and this is your only range skill, it may feel a little bit weird for you having to sort of target in the middle of groups and that kind of thing. But anyway, where this skill comes in for a few uses, I'm going to try and list them off now as best I can. One is farming. So as you're going through, clearing out these enemies, say you're farming this map, you go through, you're clearing out these enemies, you don't really want to run over here and attack and destroy these things. However, you can hurl them. So you can take out barrels and stuff from a distance while clearing through the enemies of a map. And that's one very clear use. The other one is fighting enemies from a distance. Comes, quite obvious as well. However, this is actually something that's incredibly effective. Reason being is you've got a lot of defense skills on Knight, and while it's best to kind of tank up and go in and fight in melee, if you're not using a cooldown potion or you're otherwise just not quite, strong enough for the content, you can die off quite easily if you're fighting in melee. And in fact, what you can do is stay out of range like the other classes, where they're not going to hit you. Like, you can see here, these enemies just chasing me, they're not hitting me. And you can tank up the defense skills from a range while fighting from distance, firing Hurl back at them. And because of the low cooldown, you can see with the cooldown potion I've got on right now, I can, use it, run back a bit, use it again, run back a bit, use it again. And you can actually fight very well. You're not going to clear the map as fast as you would if you're fighting in melee, but it is actually very good for range damage. It's also good in PvP, killing off people from afar. I know you can hit AFK people when in ghost form with Hurl very effectively, so it's great for killing them off like that. And otherwise, yeah, just finishing people off. If they run away, they're on low health, it's really tough to try and catch up and finish them off, but Hurl can do the job. So that's pretty much this skill in a nutshell. And in terms of how many skill points to put in it, I would mostly recommend putting 10 points in it. Because of this low cooldown, you want to keep that low cooldown so you can spam it like crazy. So it's there for your farming, so it's there for, just when you want to use it, you can use it, and usually when you're focusing on using this skill, you want to be able to spam it like crazy. So 10 points in it, and get a screw-in that is the correct element for you. There's a particular screw-in right now, which Dancing Toxic, which is the best one, kind of stands out about the others. But I'm going to be talking about screw-ins in another video, so I'm not going to go into details there. All the screw-ins right now just add damage. There's slow on Frozen Shield, which is just quite a weak slow. It's only 35%, so it's not really that useful. If they put any strong slow effects or other kind of interesting effects onto screw-ins in the future, then that is definitely something to look out for, especially because this is a low cooldown skill. You can really make use of those effects, and if it's something useful from range, like slow is actually pretty useful from range, then you can do stuff there. The last thing I actually forgot to say about this, I'd quite like to note about it, is you can use it in melee incredibly effectively. So, say you're up close and personal attacking these things, say this is a boss and you're attacking the boss, these enemies are closing in from around where you've got other things like cleave, which you can take these enemies out with. However, you can actually just hurl the boss, and where it's going to hit all the enemies around as well. So this is not just a range skill, it's also a close range skill, and for that reason it's a brilliant all-rounder. It works well with practically any build, any situation, farming, all that kind of stuff. So the next skill to talk about is Rumble. Now this skill, it kind of says it right here, it is a stun skill, and it's an area of effect stun skill. The damage itself is quite low. I mean, just look at this here, 114% compared to the 159% from this, and with a cooldown of 4 seconds versus 10 seconds, well, this is not going to be doing much damage. So this skill is purely for the crowd control. It hits quite a large area. I'm going to try and get some enemies here now. I'm actually not too aware of the radius it hits. Yeah, so there you go. It's quite a big area. Not enormous, but definitely big. And in that area it does a little bit of damage and stuns them all for 3 seconds, which is a fairly decent stun. Now, while this was good in the base game, controlling enemies and stuff, because you couldn't really massively tank at close range, this was the kind of thing which you bring in order to control those enemies so they didn't kill you off when they're in close range, and you could then be fighting them off and killing them off and, you know, doing that. Nowadays, it's not quite so useful in that regard. There's enough defense on the class that you can just tank like mad, and you don't, when they're there in close range, it doesn't matter. You actually want all the enemies close to you in order to be able to kill them all off quickly, and you just tank them. So this skill doesn't really have a whole lot of use in stunning, and it's only really when it comes to PvP where it does a 2.5 second stun, which is quite long. Most stuns are sort of 2 seconds or 1.5 seconds. If you're below 1.5 seconds, it's not worth using. You want to use the longer stuns, and a stun of 2.5 seconds is going to be very useful. So this is kind of a PvP stun skill, where again, not about the damage at all, it's just about stunning in PvP, and that's really where I'd recommend it. Now, screw-ins, they've tried to do various things with this, because like I said, it's a skill which was good in the past, but nowadays it's just not quite what you want to do on the class. So with screw-ins, they've added a few various kinds of effects. I'm not going to go through them. We're going to talk about screw-ins in a later video. However, I will say that if there's anything which really adds some powerful or strong effect onto it with screw-in, then it's definitely something to consider. The only one I'm going to note here, which I've actually got listed as the best one right now, is Volcano Eruption. And this removes the stun from it. It literally changes the skill from a stun skill into a damage skill. So this turns it into quite a lot of damage. It also reduces the range it hits. As you'll see when I use it here, I'm just going to get some enemies to chase up to me so you can have a look at the range. So I'm going to use it here. It only hits this little area, and then it continues to do damage to anything that walks within that range. Now again, you just basically go up next to the boss. When you're fighting the boss, you hit the boss with it, and then the boss will be stood in this fire and continue to take that damage. You can then keep using it. It basically becomes another damage skill on the class. That's what they did with this screw-in, and it's what definitely gives it a lot of sort of modern day use. But like I said, there may be other screw-ins in the future which do different things with this, or maybe a different version of the damage skill screw-in, and that's how you do it. That's how you'd use it. So in terms of skill points for this skill, 10 is definitely what I'd recommend. Like most support skills, or just ones that aren't focused around the damage, it's not worth putting extra points into them because you're just going to increase the cooldown and make it less frequent. You can less frequently use it for the extra effect. Now, saying that, the cooldown only goes from 10 to 15 seconds, rather than doubling like on many of the other skills. But I still wouldn't put extra points in this, and even if you're using it with Volcano Eruption for the damage dealing, it's not worth putting extra points in this because the base damage is pretty low. It's the main source of the extra damage on this particular skill rune is that extra fire damage that it's leaving on the ground, on top of, you know, it's doing the damage based on kind of similar to what the base damage is, but in fire, and then it's doing this extra fire damage. So it's the extra fire damage which is really adding the damage on, and so it's all that fire as opposed to the base damage, which is what would increase if you were to put more skill points in it. So keep it at 10 out of 99, use it as a PvP stun skill, and then there are various variants of it, like this Volcano Eruption, which turns into more of a damage skill that then maybe is something you would consider, as opposed to the other ones which probably you don't want a stun skill like that. The last thing to note about it is that it's very useful in farming to clear out an area. It's used to be a very common strategy to charge into enemies and then use Rumble to clear the area. I don't know how much that's used in modern day farming with knights. A lot of skirrins and stuff have come into play that really help out knights with farming, that they like to use those as opposed to necessarily Rumble for that reason. But one thing I definitely note is that Forest Crashes are pretty cool massive area of effect skirrin. It's just the case that in order to get the massive area of effect you need to use Cleave, which is not so good for farming, but you know, I wanted to note that here. The third skill to talk about in this video is Spikes. Now Spikes is an all-rounder, it's just an incredible skill, and mainly in the skill points from 10 to 99. So I'm going to talk about the base skill first of all, and the first 10 points. This is quite confusing to a lot of people. What it does is it gives you a buff to your character that means when enemies hit you, then they take a bit of damage. Now, you'll notice from all my videos, when these little enemies come up and they hit me in melee, they take a little bit of damage, they basically kill themselves off. The reason why that is because of a certain stat that is called Thorns. It's a very old stat, isn't really used today, and you kind of get some, I think maybe from some items, or I can't remember exactly where we get our Thorns sourced from now, but enemies attacking you are taking 2,258 damage, which because I'm in a story map and they have very little health, they're killing themselves off on those Thorns. So Spikes, what it does is it basically gives you Thorns, but a much more powerful version of Thorns. You can see here, if I look in the description here, the attack damage is 100%. Now that is 100% of what you'd normally do. So it's basically like a basic attack. You know, if you were to click on an enemy and do 100% damage, that is what you're doing here, but it's done in retaliation every time someone hits you in melee. So that's what the base skill adds onto you, and you can see it lasts 60 seconds, and it's got a cooldown of 60 seconds, so you can have it on constantly. The problem is that unless you're in, well, okay, in PvE there are quite a few melee attackers, but this damage is not really going to be doing that much. They don't hit you with tons of attacks. It's like, you know, they'll walk up to you, they'll hit you once, a couple of seconds later they'll hit you again, and each one just doing a single basic attack of damage isn't really going to do that much damage to them. So Spikes wasn't really that useful, it doesn't really do a lot, and so they revamped it with the 99 skill points and made it also give you an armor buff. Now this armor buff is crazy because, well, let's just put some points into it. So I can't remember the exact numbers for the cooldown and duration and stuff. As you can see, things change quite a bit with the cooldown and duration, but basically it becomes a lot better, and it's completely changed from how it is with just 10 points in it. So we're nearly there. Have a look at how things are. So now it lasts for 30 seconds rather than 60 seconds, and the cooldown is 40 seconds rather than 60 seconds. So one of the things to note actually with it having 60 second duration and 60 second cooldown is that when you use it, because you have some cooldown reduction from things, you can reuse the skill before the 60 seconds is up, and if you reuse this skill before it's finished, it won't reapply it properly. This is, I think, one of the reasons why they made the cooldown now longer than the duration, because if you are to use this skill, well, I have a cooldown potion on actually, so it messes it up, but if you are to use this skill, normally your cooldown would be more than 30 seconds, so by the time it comes back and is ready to use, the spikes are finished and you can reapply it properly. That's definitely something to bear in mind if you're using this skill, is make sure that the spikes buff in the top left has finished before you reuse the skill. So anyway, that's cooldown and duration. Basically you can have it on constantly still, there's absolutely no reason why you can't. It's practically constant. And while you have this on, you have a 300% armor buff, which is kind of nuts. So you can see my armor here is 150,000. It's 1.5 million. And then if I use the armor buff, or the spikes buff, it goes to 3.9 million. This 300%, because we've already got 105% bonus from the passive armor here, and also the guild bonus, which, if we can find it here, the guild bonus giving you 5%. Because we've already got plus 105%, this 300% armor buff is actually kind of multiplying your armor by 2.5 times. So you can think of it like a 60% damage reduction, except that it doesn't stack with other percentage damage reductions. But since you can have this on constantly, you're basically making yourself more than double as tough to kill by having 99 points in spikes. Which is crazy, and it's why this skill is probably the best one to get to 99 points first of all, because it just makes you way, way tankier. And that's what I mean is when I was saying earlier on about modern day knights just being able to tank everything compared to the past. This is one of the big reasons why. If you can get 99 points in this, you're going to tank like mad. And for that reason, you just use it constantly. You're not using it for that thorn effect, that spikes actual damage. However, it is also worthy of noting that it's 400% damage, which is kind of decent now. That's not elemental damage, so it's not going to be multiplied by elemental stats or anything, but 400% is still pretty good. Now, where that 400% comes into play most of all is in PvP, when you are fighting other knights. Now, wizards and archers, they will fight from range. Their basic attacks are from range, so they're not going to be getting any retaliation damage. However, knights will. If they come up and they hit you with basic attacks, or actually a lot of their skills, they're going to be triggering these spikes and be taking damage as retaliation. Now, if you stack this up with, I'm going to mention it now, in Rage here, if you put 99 points in here, you get a damage buff of 100% and also auto crit. If you have that on, and you have this spikes buff on, well, when enemy knights hit you in PvP, they're taking a ton of damage in retaliation. So it's actually a surprisingly effective way to deal damage to knights, not just actually tanking for yourself. But anyway, that's enough details on that. Talking about skill runes now. The skill runes for this, there are a couple of interesting ones which are quite difficult to kind of read and kind of work out how you use them. Emberglow here is an example. I'm just going to quickly go through it. It's every 7th hit you take. It says melee hit, but it's actually any kind of hit for this particular skill rune. And then it will pull in the enemies and slow them. And it can do this every 2 seconds at most. It can't do it any more frequently than 2 seconds. In PvP, rather than pulling them in, it stuns them for half a second, which is actually more annoying than anything else. You don't want short stuns. But anyway, it will pull these enemies next to you and then slow them so they struggle to get away from you. It basically helps the knight kind of work. And if you think about it, since you can tank with something like spikes, and it doesn't matter so much if enemies are next to you, well, pulling them next to you is actually helpful. And then you've got something like Ice Needles. Now, Ice Needles is the real standout skill rune right now. There may be other skill runes in the future which do something very effectively. However, Ice Needles is a standout one because the damage added by the skill rune crits. All the damage by the other skill runes, the older skill runes, it says like here, 105% nature damage. However, actually that doesn't crit, so the damage it deals is very low. But Ice Needles does crit, so the damage it deals is exceptionally high. So that combined, Ice Needles combined with 99 points, and then in Rage you get all the damage, the auto crit, and then a knight is attacking in PvP. That's really where you can do tons of damage to other knights in retaliation. So that's a really cool use of this skill. Otherwise, yeah, I would recommend Ice Needles in general, just because it's just going to make this skill do some nice damage. But mainly you're using it for that armor buff, and you want to have the 99 points in it for it to really be effective. Before 99 points, well, any stage before then is going to help you with an armor buff, but what I mean is the first 10 points, they're not really going to do much for you because this skill just doesn't actually do that much with the retaliation damage. So I haven't really shown you it, but I will show you it now with a couple of different skill runes in it, just because, let's finish off this video with a little bit of gameplay. So there we have the spikes. As you can see, when they hit you, they're taking damage and some water damage as well, and then occasionally it does an ice burst. which is just helpful for taking out little groups. That doesn't do much damage, that Ice Burst. That's just the effect of the the extra effect of the Skaroon. I'm going to show the other one now, although we're going to have to wait until this one's ended before I can put the other one on. But that's how the skill works. So I've talked about all 3 skills now. I hope it's given you a good idea of how each one of them functions, and you now know how to use them, how many skill points to put in them. That's the pull effect there that you can see happens from time to time as you're getting hit by enemies, and it holds them in close to you. It used to be something I'd recommend highly. However, because we now have Sparkling Gift on charge, which pulls enemies in, that's your kind of main use for pulling enemies in, rather than needing something like Ember Glow, which is why you can use Ice Needles instead for the extra damage. But anyway, that's those 3 skills. Talk about skill points. You can see it's 10, 10, and then 99. That's what I'd recommend on them. You get a lovely range damage skill that's very versatile, good area of effect, damage dealing. You've got here, which is Rumble, which is a area stun, pretty good in PvP for long stun effects, and otherwise certain skills like Volcano Eruption can turn it into a damage skill for PvE. And then you've got Spikes, which is a lovely defense buff that can also turn into a PvP damage dealer against other knights. And there are Skaroons to help things function and otherwise just deal damage. So thanks very much for watching. That's these 3 skills. I hope you'll see you in the next one.